Hello lads and welcome back to War Thunder with Koala, and welcome to some F-5E Tiger 2 gameplay. In today's video I want to talk about sort of the current meta of top tier RRB, at least pre-patch 2.9 or direct hit, and how the Tiger 2 and aircraft like it fit in with everything that's happening. So this match was played before the Viggen, before Skyflash and the new AIM-7s, before R60Ms and premium A5s. But the good thing is that what I'm about to show you hasn't changed. And with the insane amount of bugs that the patch has brought to air battles at least, it's not like I really want to make a video on the Viggen or the F-4EJ, because it'd be worthless in 2 weeks when everything changes and the meta kind of settles back down. Now, when it comes to top tier jets and so-called missile meta, which we'll spend several other videos talking about, I've always been a huge advocate for climbing. You know, your jets go faster, your missiles perform better at altitude, your radars are much more reliable, you have the ability to dive away from someone, which reduces the range of enemy missiles, and especially for radar homing R530s and AIM-7 Sparrows, you need to be at altitude for them to work. The F-104s need altitude to be able to dive on targets. If they ever dip below Mach 1, they pretty much die. And even for things like the MiG-21MF or the Draken, which can dogfight effectively, don't carry any radar homing missiles, and in the Draken's case, doesn't even have a radar warning receiver. Without altitude, you lose all your speed after one turn, and become a sitting duck for someone else. I guess maybe the MiG-19s don't get much out of it, they are at a lower BR, but they don't have flares, so if they don't have anywhere to go, they can kind of get caught out. And when fighting in up tiers, do prefer having the ability to dive on an enemy or zoom up to intercept them. That brings us to the F5, which in my honest opinion, this is the only top tier jet which shouldn't climb. Now we're playing on Korea, which despite it still being relatively small for Mach 2 capable jets equipped with Sparrows, is still one of, if not the best maps for top tier jets, and the terrain is going to help us here. First target we engage is a Phantom FGR, and now look at this. To put things into perspective of what you're watching, that aircraft has the best acceleration for top tier, the second best climb rate, and at least until the EJ Kai came out, the best radar. And really, it was the king of missile combat specifically. I even suggest not taking the 20mm on it once you have the radar homing missiles. The F-5E, on the other hand, is the worst accelerating 11.0 jet besides the F-5E, which shouldn't be at that BR, and really has no ability to touch a British Phantom if played correctly. Yeah, climb in your top tier jets. If it's not an F-5E, get some altitude. That is one of the enemy team's most powerful jets gone very easily. And unfortunately, because that did take a couple more bursts than I was hoping for, these 20mm aren't quite as good as Vulcans. The FGR did manage to guide a Sparrow and take out our F-4E, but not to worry, we still have both of our missiles and we're able to use the terrain to flank around the enemy team. This is very important here, in that we're not staying at low altitude and just flying towards the enemy jets, hoping one of them will turn fight us and the rest won't, because that is a recipe for failure. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the positions of the enemy team. I can see several MiGs at high altitude, which is good to see, but I'm also suspecting that at least one or two enemy players will be over in this location, and we can sneak up on them. And sure enough, just as I throw away the idea of climbing up towards those MiG-23s, an F-4F comes over the ridge, and not going to commit to a head-on pass, and here is where I do need to be very careful. See, the F5 has the benefit of high energy retention, something quite rare for top tier jets, which means it can dogfight on the deck quite comfortably against one opponent. But as soon as I see that the MiGs above me have transitioned a little further over the top of me, they're going to be able to dive down at any point and outnumber me, perhaps launch an R-23T, which is the long-range heat-seeking missile. I am out of there. What I'm trying to do is single out targets, where even a more lengthy dogfight, where I might have to loop over a couple of times and bleed the opponent of their energy, isn't going to put me in the crosshairs of another enemy player. Because while in lower tiers, props and early jets, you only have to be a few kilometers away from the rest of the enemy team to be safe, In top tier, that range is more like 9 to 12 kilometers, where if there are any other enemies inside that range, I cannot guarantee that I am safe. Loop up and over on the MiG-21 Bess, who unfortunately did manage to kill our friendly F-104 after he took out the F-4F. I wait for him to roll over, which makes him a nice easy target for the AIM-9J, and that's our second kill. And because we and the F-104, who I have to give a shout out to, Jedi East, if you're watching this, great job dude. But because we did separate that MiG and the F-4F away from their teammates, we are able to reset for the MiG-23, drop a couple of flares to decoy his R60, stay underneath him through the marge, there is no way he's pulling with that, and as we exit the turn, we are able to launch our last Sidewinder at him. The F-5 as an aircraft I like to think of as an aggressive, supportive fighter, and this is something I've recently found out I am slightly addicted to. You know, first it was the Sagittario, little bit slower than a MiG-15 Bess or F-Sabre, it doesn't have the energy retention, but my god can that thing dogfight when it gets to run you down. The thing is that with support fighters at lower battle ratings, even up in the 8.0 range, the F2H Banshee for example, you generally want to be above the enemy, to be able to dive down on furballs that are already going at lower altitudes. You prevent yourself from being a sought after target for the enemy team, because as soon as they get it in their heads that you are someone they want to shoot down, you really can't do much about it, at least not if the enemy pilot is any good. In top tier jets, however, all the important targets should be at high altitude, or at least early on, or they won't survive for long. So putting the F-5E into an inconspicuous, low altitude flanking route really allows you to start baiting enemies to come after you one by one. You single them out, coax them away from their team, and by the time their teammates come to support them, you've already bled them of their energy, and it's too late. Rinse and repeat. Now this is usually enough if done properly to prevent your team from being overwhelmed, but in this particular match, that just wasn't the way the cookie crumbled. We are now alone against 4 enemies. Luckily, both the J-7E, which is probably the only aircraft I have to really worry about in a one-to-one dogfight, and the MiG-21 MF are headed back to their airfield, and their last player is over in that direction as well. And this MiG-23, props to this guy, who I'm sure thought that what he was doing was preventing me from taking advantage of the situation and executing his teammates as they return to base. But the thing is, I can dogfight any one of these aircraft quite easily. The F-5E has a much higher turn rate than an MF, so long as the MF isn't running minimum fuel. The J-7E can prove a problem, which we're going to see later on, but the MiG-23 is one of, if not the only aircraft in game that can win a rate fight against a Tiger. Now, what is a rate fight versus a scissors, a 1-circle versus 2-circle fight, we went over in the last video in the Dogfight series, but to sum it up here, I can go into a flat scissors and easily outcompete the flogger. I can go into a rate fight, a continuous turn, and the MiG-21s won't be able to touch me, they don't retain enough energy. But if I were forced to fight both a MiG-21 and a MiG-23 at the same time, I am dead. But a MiG-23 alone isn't much of a threat, and his teammates, who could guarantee the game here, are nowhere to be found. And I felt really sorry for him, because this would have been just an outstanding move, something to be praised enormously. I don't think I can highlight just how screwed I would have been here if he'd have done this with just one of his other teammates around. But instead, he gets roped into another 1v1, and, well, I think I can count that as a maneuver kill. Now we have all the time in the world to go back to base, land and rearm, and because I've taken no damage yet this game, I can even J out the second my aircraft comes to a stop on the runway, and start rolling again with 2 more Sidewinders and full fuel in less than 60 seconds. The MF that was limping back to base with the J7 didn't make it, so that just leaves a 2v1 against another MiG-21 MF who I'm not really threatened by at this point, and the J-7E. And to touch on the actual RRB meta itself, I think the easiest way to boil it down is RRB is trying to be 2 things, both a combination PvP and PvE game, something that enduring conflicts just does a hell of a lot better, and a dedicated team deathmatch, where battles can be won and done by skilled pilots in just a few short minutes. The problem is that neither of these work. The team deathmatch couldn't exist when bombing bases and killing tanks and pillboxes could end games in just a couple of minutes, especially at high BRs. So instead, the ability for ground targets, bases, and airfield bombing to end the game was removed. Now this would have been good, but then airfield protection became exactly what nobody wanted. Entirely reliable and uncounterable, which means that an aircraft can decide to sit on their runway, be effectively invulnerable, and the win or loss will come down generally to whichever side has the auto win on that map. What I tend to believe, at least this should be able to be the case, and many of the content creators on the CC Discord have also put this exact same thing forth, is that you shouldn't have to RTB in the first place. If you're managing your fuel and ammunition correctly, you should never run out of either while there are still fighters alive on the enemy team. If you do, then you are rightfully vulnerable, and taking an opportunity to kill you at that point is just a smart tactic. The thing is that with the current size of the teams often being 13 versus 13, which is way too many, jets like the F-5 are going to have to RTB. To reliably be effective, they need more than one flyout. So what I would do is split AirRB into two modes, one that functions more as an RBEC mode with up to 32 versus 32 players on massive maps, 256 square kilometers, plenty of different ground-based objectives, and even rank 6 and 7 bomber aircraft, alongside an actual dogfight game mode with no airfield protection at all and no ground targets, 5 versus 5, and only fighters allowed. This lets every kind of player get what they want out of air battles without it being at the expense of any other. Aircraft like the B-1 Lancer, Avro Vulcan and Mirage 4 have their place, and top tier jet combat, BVR combat, BFM can actually be done properly. And speaking of combat, we are now locked in a dogfight with both of the remaining enemy jets who coordinated their engagement perfectly, but neither of them have the energy that we do. I can force the rate fight, take out the MiG-21 MF nice and quickly, notice me pre-flaring at the top of that loop expecting a missile from the J7, and now we're able to transition to a rate fight. What this means is that we are trying to come around the circle faster than our opponent can do the same. So in this case, it doesn't actually matter if the other aircraft can turn tighter than us. If we can complete the turn faster, we will eventually win. And you can see just how badly we would have lost this if the MiG-23 was still around, because what we are doing against the J7, the MiG-23 can do against us. And the best way to fight the MiG-23 in an F5, the J7 does better. Now the J7E in the rate fight like this will actually hold with the Tiger II surprisingly well, but provided I can use a little bit of the vertical, he either has to drop energy to follow me and match my altitude, very bad for a delta wing aircraft, or dive even lower, which widens his turning circle and puts me closer behind him. And here's where a lot of players unfamiliar with these top tier aircraft would make the mistake of going straight up, but in a rate fight, that is the last thing you want to do. Unlike in props, for example, which tend to turn tighter the slower they get, these top-end jets turn much faster at speed, usually 500 to 800 kilometers per hour. And in a rate fight, energy retention is the name of the game. So don't get impatient, keep your speed around 540 kph in the F-5E seems to work the best, and eventually you will come around. In this case, I'm also trying to make use of the terrain. That should prevent the J7 from dropping his nose any lower than we do in the turn. If he does, then he's got to move back up again to crest over these ridgelines. And if I can trick him into making enough of these maneuvers, we will begin to bleed him of his energy. A two-circle rate fight like this is very rare to see in RRB, which is probably why neither the MiG-21 nor this J7 knew to expect it or prevent me from doing it. But once you get the F-5E in a rate fight with terrain like that, the J7 is really just stalling for time. He exits the rate fight nowhere near far enough away to accelerate away from me, and even if he had, I have two AIM-9 Sidewinders ready to catch him down. So as we gun him down, that's 5 kills, 6 if you count the maneuver kill on the MiG-23. Would be really nice if those could be counted in some way. And an epic carry match in what has become one of my new favourite jets in game. And as a top tier dogfighter, definitely a very interesting one. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and that if you did, you leave a like and subscribe, support the channel on Pledge-Doh. We are currently trying to raise funds to upgrade the PC and return to bi-weekly live streams. And until the next time, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you lads in the skies. Oh, I'm an asshole. I'm such an asshole. I have to do it though, otherwise my team's fucked. Oh god, I'm such a bastard.